Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from Fantasy Football Scout. My name is Tom and today I'm joined by Sam and we're going to review all 20 teams' FPL pre-season in about 40 minutes, giving you everything you need to know, new signings, who's in form, any big injuries and any other facts you need to know heading into game week 1, which is tomorrow. Sam, excited in a word?
Yes, can't wait. I'm also a bit nervous though. I don't think I'm ready yet.
No, neither. That Oscar Bob injury's thrown me a little bit, but we're not here to talk about our teams. If you want to check out Sam's team, you can do that on the channel. That was yesterday's video. Joe's team is out now, FPL General's team as well, and Tom Freeman's team is out as well, so they're all on the channel for you to check out. But for now, we're going to chat pre-season, so make sure you've liked the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll get straight into it with Arsenal. Just to say, all of the content in this video is from the Fantasy Football Scout pre-season page, which you can check out for free on the website, and that includes the minutes tracker as well, which is a premium feature, but which we'll use a little bit in this video as well. So Sam, first of all, Arsenal, they've had a decent pre-season. Their most recent game, they won 2-0. It was pretty straightforward, and it was a pretty similar team that lined up to what we've become accustomed to last season. So, for example, Calafiori was on the bench, so it doesn't look like he's going to trouble the starting 11 just yet. So familiar faces for FPL managers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, early on in pre-season, maybe the form is less important to us, but what's happening in these latter games, I think is really important. And Arsenal have been really good in the last couple, obviously, like you said, beating Lyon at home, and then before that being Bayern by Leverkusen, that is, by 4-1. So they've been good. They've been scoring plenty of goals. Interestingly, Saliba and Gabriel with the goals in the latest game, which again throws up that whole conversation that we were having at the beginning of last season, weren't we, about deciding between Saliba and Gabriel. Rice with both of the assists in that one. So another potential cheap option if you don't have the budget, because Arsenal do seem to be the team that a lot of people are sacrificing because they can't afford the budget for their players. But Rice isn't a nice cheap price point, so could be a decent option. And I think when you look at their form players, you've got Jesus and Havertz actually, who have been the standout players for them. Jesus with 3 goals and an assist, and Havertz with 2 goals and 2 assists over the course of this pre-season. So some decent options there.
Yeah, just a word of caution on Jesus. I think he didn't start the last friendly. It was
Mm.
Havertz up front. So I guess there's a decision there for Arteta between Partey and Jesus about whether he plays Havertz in the midfield or not.
Mm.
So yeah, Jesus is probably an avoid, I would say, but Havertz is definitely a bit of a differential option.
Yeah, and I think we're expecting in terms of their new signings, they've obviously only had two. David Raya coming in permanently. He'll be in goal for them, but Calafiori, as you said, I'm expecting him to start the first few matches at least on the bench. Probably Zinchenko getting the start in these early weeks, and then as time moves forward into the season, I would expect Calafiori to get more and more minutes. But if you do want to invest in the Arsenal defence, then Gabriel Saliba, Ben White, they feel like the safest bets in this early part of the season.
Yeah. And we should just say as well that Saka is back. He played 45 minutes against Leverkusen, and then I think he played about 60, 65 against Lyon. So
Mm.
he looks good to go for game week 1, which is good news for lots of managers. Cool. So moving on to Aston Villa. There's two big headlines here. Really, is Morgan Rogers a few weeks ago was everyone's favourite footballer, and now no one seems to remember him. But so he got 3 goals and 2 assists, and he has been starting as well. And I guess the second headline is that we haven't seen Ollie Watkins yet at all.
Yeah, and probably would expect him still to start, even though we haven't seen him in the early part of pre or in any part of pre-season because of his longevity with England at the Euros. But I still would expect him to get the nod in game week 1. I think you're right about Morgan Rogers. A few weeks ago, had FPL launched and started, we'd have seen him in a lot more teams than we are right now because he is their informed player. And across pre-season, he still is their informed player, right? He's got 3 goals and 2 assists. But I would expect that, moving into the season, his form's dipped a little bit this back end of pre-season. But then Aston Villa haven't really been that great in this pre-season period. I was expecting them to be really good, but they have been without a lot of their key assets. And of course, lost Douglas Luiz this summer. So we'll see. But for me, Morgan Rogers, my enthusiasm for him has calmed down a little bit in these last couple of games.
Yeah, I mean they've got couple of tough games to start, and that's probably the good thing about Watkins. I think he's probably a wait and watch for game week 3. for most people. Just another name, Leon Bailey he's actually top of the projected points on Scout value wise for the mid-price midfielders. He's got a goal and assist, and it looks like he's going to start. So that's potentially a name to keep an eye on. And then just looking at their signings, they've lost a couple of big players, Diaby and Douglas Luiz. So perhaps it's a bit of a wait and watch there as well. But one of the signings that stood out to me was Ian Maatsen. If he starts at left back, he could be really, really attacking.
Yeah, because he could end up being in the sort of Trent style situation where we see him almost playing in midfield, or could be in that left back position. We kind of have to wait and see. I'd expect him to start the season, but defensively, they haven't looked great in pre-season. You know, they've conceded a lot of goals over the course of this period, and I'm not convinced actually that they're going to be as defensively solid in these first opening few weeks. I think there's a lot of learning still to do there with the new players coming in and with the players that they've let go leaving. I think it offers opportunities, particularly for Leon Bailey without Diaby and Douglas Luiz. I'd expect him to be an ever present now as long as he can stay fit. But Maatsen is that little bit more expensive as well. I've got to pay a little bit more for him at 5 million. I think the Villa defence is just a little bit of a wait and see for me right now.
Yeah. So the big news there is that we haven't seen Ollie Watkins, so do keep your eyes peeled for the press conference tomorrow on all the Scout channels, as usual. So moving on to Bournemouth. So obviously the big thing for Bournemouth has been they've lost Solanke. So you stop smiling, Sam, Spurs fan. But but yeah, so they haven't signed a striker yet, although they have been linked with one. And the other big piece of news is that Kluivert took a penalty in the last game. So it looks like he may take them in Solanke's absence.
Yeah, I think so. That would be my expectation. He's taken them before, and like you say, he was the one that took them in this last game. It will be interesting to see with Bournemouth how they cope without Solanke's goals, because obviously losing 19 goals from last season would be difficult if they don't sign somebody to replace him. But as you say, he is linked. It's just unlikely they're going to get somebody in ahead of game week 1 now. It's too close to that game. So I would expect that they'll be without a striker for game week 1. Maybe it gives us some opportunities as we go through in the early part of the season to just watch them and see. But at the moment, not a huge amount of signings coming in, but one massive one going out. And pre-season form has been actually quite good. I mean, they've had some decent results, a couple of draws with Wrexham and Arsenal, and then after that, a couple of wins. So they've been all right in pre-season. It's just, how does the loss of Solanke affect them in front of goal in particular?
Yeah, I think Senese went off injured in the last friendly, so that's one to watch as well. Because if he's out, that obviously makes them significantly weaker at the back. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled on the press conference for that. Moving on to Brentford. Brentford are a little bit of flux, I think, because they obviously signed their striker Thiago, who's now injured, so he's not an option. Tony's back. I think he's played 45 minutes in pre-season, so you'd think he's going to start, but then he wasn't actually in the team at the end of last season. But Mbeumo is looking good, 3 goals and an assist, and potentially has penalties if Tony doesn't start or he leaves, because he could still leave. Do you think Mbeumo's being overlooked a little bit?
I think so. I think the thing is that the Brentford fixtures are quite mixed to start the season, and I think that's what's putting a lot of people off. Had they had a nicer run in to start the season, then I would expect that Mbeumo would have been in more teams than he currently is. He is the safe bet if you want to go for Brentford. I think with Tony's future still really uncertain, I thought he was going to probably stay in the league. I was expecting him to be the player that came to Spurs. So the fact that it wasn't him and that it was Solanke now leaves Tony with a little bit more uncertainty, I think, in terms of where he ends up or if he stays at Brentford. Because of that, he becomes a bit of a non-option. And I also think at his price point up top, you can probably get somebody with nicer fixtures to start the season on. But Mbeumo is one for me who I'm always interested in. Like you say, will have penalties if Tony isn't there with the injury to the new striker that they've signed. Was talismanic for them in the early part of last season, was really, really good. Just that they don't score a huge amount of goals necessarily, and I thought that was going to improve with the signing of Thiago up top. But of course, they've been really unlucky there with him picking up what looks like a relatively long injury. So yeah, for me, it's Mbeumo or nobody. I do quite like still the Flecken picking goal. I think there's not There's not necessarily a huge amount of clean sheets, but what we do know with Flecken is that there will be plenty of save points that are coming for Brentford from the way that they play. And they were much more solid defensively at the back end of last season, but they did have a lot of players that came in that period, like they have Reguilon on loan, who was actually quite decent for them last time around. So we'll have to see, but you can, if you want to, go for the very cheap double Brentford goalkeeper combo and get yourself those for 8.5 million, which, if budgets are tight, might actually be nice because you will get the security of always having a goalkeeper without the worry of a benching.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. One caution though is that their fullbacks Henry and Hickey are still injured, which is obviously a big
Correct.
loss. And just briefly, they have signed Carvalho for 5 million. Sorry, he's 5 million in FPL. So we'll have to see where he fits in, but he could be a really good cheap asset when the fixtures improve a little bit.
Mm.
Cool. So moving on to Brighton, there's been quite a bit of interest in Brighton, especially one of their new signings, Minter, who has scored 3 goals and got 2 assists in pre-season. Same as Welbeck, who's also scored 3 goals. They've been playing with the front four of Welbeck, Minter, João Pedro, and Mitoma. So that is quite, on paper, that's a really, really exciting front line.
Mm.
Well, how do you see that after pre-season?
I mean, they're after another two players in, if you listen to the reports in the media today. So, and both of them in the kind of forward, well, one's a midfielder, one's a forward. So we'll have to see what impact that has. João Pedro obviously missed most of pre-season and they missed the Japanese tour because of his rib injury. But like you say, was back, did score in the game on Saturday. Welbeck has been in fantastic form. So making a decision if he's going to play just one of them as to who that might be could be interesting come the weekend. But we've seen all four of them play in the last game. Minter, I think, is the one that's the most attractive to me from the Brighton team. He's cheap. He's a nice enabler as well across the rest of that team, and has been finding the back of the net regularly, but also has a good route to points through his assist potential as well. So a nice option there up top if you want to go for them. Defensively, of course, Brighton also have Barco, who are expecting to start in defence. He seems to be on corners. With Estupinan's injury recovery period seemingly still a bit uncertain, like he basically said around September, didn't he? Around international break, but we've not really had any more news on how that recovery is going. So even if you only get the opening sort of 4 weeks of the season from Barco, that might just be enough to give us an insight into who we want elsewhere. And at 4 million, I think he is the 4 million defender of choice.
Yeah, yeah, he's been starting regularly, and as you say, taking corners as well. So I'm not sure there's a more attractive 4 million defender there. Cool. So we'll move on. We should
Your
just say
boy's
that.
next.
Yeah, sorry. We should just say that Pascal Gross has left, which is quite a
Yes.
big blow. So I have to see how they line up and how they cope without him. But that's a big loss because he's obviously been ever present in the Premier League era for Brighton. Cool. So we'll move on to Chelsea.
No bias now, please.
No, no bias. On burning questions yesterday, people were hitting me for my bias, but as you can see there, the form players in Nkunku, 3 goals, 1 assist. I'm really high on Nkunku. I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to make a mockery of 6.5 million. Like I think there's a good chance he's going to be our top non-penalty goal scorer. To be honest with you, just the positions he takes up in the box, I think is a bit more threatening than Palmer, especially if he's playing wide right. But yeah, signings wise, we've obviously made a few, as people probably know. Goalkeeper, it's a bit of a wait and see, although I think Sanchez will start the season. But look, Jorgensen will probably play the Conference League games, and then if he does well and Sanchez makes a mistake, I think we could see that change. So I'd avoid them. Pedro Neto, I think, is really interesting because I do think he'll be the first choice left winger in a couple of weeks. But obviously not for now. But yeah, Nkunku, Palmer, anyone else, I think is a little bit of an avoid.
Difficult, I think, isn't it, with Chelsea because of that Man City game to start the season. A lot of people will avoid on that basis, and they haven't really impressed in pre-season. I know you went to the last game, but for me, I was very, very keen on Nkunku in the early part of the season, and over the last few weeks, my enthusiasm has waned a little bit as Chelsea have struggled in pre-season. So yes, there's been plenty of goals for Nkunku, but we haven't really seen Chelsea finding a groove yet, I don't think, under the new manager. And I'm kind of intrigued to see where Palmer fits back in and how Chelsea set up once he's around because we haven't seen him yet in pre season. So yeah, for me, Nkunku is my preferred of the Chelsea assets, and there's still a good chance I might go back there because he's 0.5 cheaper than Eze, who we'll talk about when we talk about Palace. But that 0.5 could make quite a lot of difference to the way that my team is structured, particularly in terms of leaving some money in the bank for the early weeks of price changes chaos. So yeah, I think Nkunku for me is preferred. Madueke has actually impressed in pre-season. He's been all right at a time where Chelsea haven't been great. So they're a little bit of a wait and see for me because I'm never really sure with new managers quite how we're going to see the start of the season go.
Yeah. I do think attacking wise we'll be fine. I've been impressed with us going forward. Defensively, we're a bit suspect. But yeah, if it means anything, I'm benching Vardiel in game week 1 because I think we'll score. But I also think Haaland will score as well. So there you go.
I think we all think that.
Cool. So we're going to Palace. Palace have had a bit of a sort of disrupted pre-season. Obviously, Mateta's been at the Olympics, so we're not expecting him to start game week 1. But I guess there's an outside chance because he's obviously been keeping fit. Eze has just come back for the last friendly. I think he played an hour, and he's been away with England obviously. And there's transfer speculation, which to be honest has put me off him, especially now that Bob's injured. And City have sold Alvarez. It kind of seems like inevitable that they might come in for Eze. But yeah, What do you think about Palace? And they've lost Elise as well, so that's potentially their front three. All have question marks over them.
Yeah, and obviously Gahey is subject to a lot of interest as well from
And Anderson as
Newcastle.
well.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that they've had three bids for Gahey, Anderson as well. It feels like a difficult summer. I thought that Palace were going to do really well this season. The back end of last season, they were fantastic. They were scoring goals for fun. Defensively, they were solid. The new manager bounce wasn't just a little bounce, it was a bounce that just rolled through most of the end of the season. And I was expecting them to have a really good season this time around, but actually, I have concerns at the moment because they're losing so many of their key assets. The loss of Elise is big, but I thought that might be coverable by having Mateta and having Eze there. I actually think Mateta will probably start in game week 1. He had a break before the Olympics because obviously he hadn't gone to the Euros. He'd had a bit of a summer, then gone off to do the Olympics with France, and so has had kind of almost like a pre-season with them, although not with Crystal Palace. I take the point there, but he has had sort of the same or similar levels of game time to his Palace teammates, just not alongside them. And I think they're going to need him because they are losing a lot of their assets. Obviously, there was rumours that Eze was being linked with a number of clubs this summer, but the ones with Man City do seem to be getting stronger and stronger as we get closer to the deadline. And that does really put me off him as an FPL asset because as soon as you get added into that Man City team, you become much more of a rotation risk and you lose some of the benefits of playing for a team like Palace, which is, regular starting, potential, penalty responsibilities, all of that kind of talismanic stuff that comes with owning him there. And defensively, I've got Henderson as my goalkeeper at the moment, but I am also feeling a little bit unsure about that given the potential loss of two of their key defenders. So
Yeah, same.
Palace have
Yeah.
gone from being massively high on my radar of teams to attack to being a team that I am really calling on and calling on quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a shock if in a week, 10 days, a week time, Gahey's gone to Newcastle and Eze's gone to City, and all of a sudden that's big concerns. We should just quickly say that they've signed Kamada, who is their new winger, essentially their Elise replacement, and he's had a decent pre-season with 2 goals and 2 assists, and he's just 5.5 million, so it's potentially one there to watch. Cool. So we'll move on to Everton. Everton, I think the big story with Everton is that Branthwaite is not fit and is unlikely to start game week 1. So that may put you off Everton defence a little bit and perhaps bring Brighton attackers up on your radar for game week 1 as well. Pickford is back though after England. Mikalenko is back. He was injured at the start, but he's fit now. And Calvert-Lewin has scored a couple of goals, and I've seen a little bit of hype on him in the community.
The problem with Calvert Lewin is, and we have it every year, don't we, that we get this little bit of hype and then he gets injured or Everton aren't good going forward. And this is the problem that we have with him is that actually Everton just don't usually score that many goals. Now in pre-season, actually they haven't been great either. Like, they lost 3-0 to Coventry City, they lost 2-1 to Salford, they've drawn with Sligo Rovers at the beginning of pre-season. Like, they're not a hugely great form. They did get a draw against Roma in their last match, 1-0. Calvert-Lewin was the guy that got the goal in that one. But I don't know that I see a lot of goals out of this Everton team this season. And so I think with the front three feeling quite important with Haaland and Isak, and then whoever you want to go for in the kind of the Solanke, or be it Wood or Jalpejo or whoever it is, I just don't see that there's a spot that you can find for Calvert Lewin in that front three. And the Everton midfielders, I mean, you've got Jack Harrison, who has been good in the past in the Premier League back in his Leeds days, but I'm just not entirely sure with Everton how they're going to be in attack. So for me, it's defence or bust with Everton, and I think if you want to go there, it's Pickford, or if you don't want to spend that much money, it's Mikolenko, and they're really the only two options I'd consider there.
Yeah, they've signed Iliman and Dye from Marseille, who was obviously at Sheffield United a couple of years ago in the Championship and was one of the best players there. So he's potentially a cheap midfielder to keep an eye on as we go through the season. On to Fulham. Fulham, obviously Friday night game tomorrow. They've got a bit of FPL interest in Muniz and Smith Rowe, who's come in and scored 2 goals in 2 friendlies. So he's obviously getting excitement. And also Robinson as well. Robinson's got 2 assists in pre-season, attacking left back with good fixtures to start. So there's 3 good assets there. Despite the fact they've lost Tosin, doesn't seem to have disrupted them too much.
No, I'm quite hot on Fulham actually to start the season. They've also kept a couple of clean sheets in pre-season, which often you don't see. We don't see a lot of clean sheets in pre-season. Often it's just attack from both sides. But we have seen 2 clean sheets, including one in their last game against Tottenham. So I'm keen on Robinson. I think he's a great asset. He's got the assist potential as we've seen, and they have been keeping clean sheets. And the fixtures do look nice for the well, actually, for quite a long time into the season, you've got plenty of potential for a lot of clean sheets there. And I think they've made some decent signings. They've obviously brought Sessegnon back. He came on a free release by Spurs after his injury crisis that he's had there. Whether he can stay fit enough to make a difference to Fulham, we don't know. But it's definitely Smith Rowe that's the key signing here. He's come from Arsenal, again quite injury prone, lots of disruption last time around. Only started 3 games for Arsenal last season, but he did average 5 points per start in those games. So if we can get Smith Rowe, 1, regularly starting and 2, staying fit, I think he's a really lovely option at 5.5 million in a Fulham team that I would expect to still be quite attacking. You've got players like Muniz who were great in the latter part of last season, and I'm keen. I'm keen to invest in Fulham, and I think I'll probably start the season with 2 of them.
Yeah, it looks like Adama Traore is going to be starting as well. So if you want a massive differential there for Friday night, he could be a good asset up against the United defence that's still got a few injuries. But obviously, we should say they've lost Paulinho, so that is obviously a massive blow. And Marco Silva said today that they're going to look to sign a new number 6. So watch and wait on there because that could impact their defence. Cool, so moving on to Ipswich Town. They are obviously new to the Premier League. They've had a decent pre-season, 3 wins out of 4, 3 clean sheets as well. The biggest signing is they've got Hutchinson back from Chelsea permanently this time. They've also signed Liam Delap from Man City, who's a 4.5 million forward, so he could be of interest. And they've got Muric as well, who we know last year from Burnley.
Yeah, and I think with the newly promoted clubs, often we try and steer clear of them, particularly in attack or in play or in positions where you might want to play that player weekly. And I think with Ipswich, that probably even with these new signings remains the case. However, I do think that there are some players there. Like, I really like Leif Davis. I still really like him. 18 assists last time around in the Championship and 3 goals. So he's definitely got that attacking threat that you can have in there. And like you say, Hutchinson, Delap, they are decent options if you want to go for some differential picks, particularly with Delap. If you are looking to go really super heavy in your midfield, or you want to have a back three that's got somebody like Trent in it, you might need that extra cheap third forward. And going for him should give you enough minutes to cover it. It's just whether he gets enough points.
Yeah, and one of their new signings as well, Ben Johnson. He is a 4 million defender from West Ham, who played as the right wing back in the last pre-season friendly and looks pretty attacking. So he's potentially now the best defender ahead of Leif Davis, because obviously 18 assists in the Championship as Harry was saying on Burning Questions yesterday, that's when they were the best team, more or less.
For sure. Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
it remains to be seen if he can replicate that this year. But Ben Johnson's definitely one to watch if you don't fancy Barco. So cool. On to another promoted team, and that's Leicester. And to be honest, they have had an absolutely shocking pre-season. The Steve Cooper is not happy. They've got bad injuries. They haven't really signed anyone big who they expect to make an impact. And they obviously lost 3-0 to Lens in Lens in their last pre-season friendly. So, as a Spurs fan, you must be quite enjoying this.
Do you know, of all the three newly promoted clubs, I was expecting Leicester actually to be the one that had the most chance of staying up because they've got the pedigree, they know what it takes to be in the Premier League. They've been a Premier League club for years and years until they went down and then had that bounce back quickly. But they've had a really tough pre-season, and the fact that they've not really signed anybody, I'm looking at this team and I'm thinking, where are the goals coming from? Where are the clean sheets? That it looks like a struggle. And when you look at their pre-season fixtures, I mean, they've won one, and they've won two in the early part of the season. So they won against Shrewsbury Town, which you would expect them to be able to beat Shrewsbury Town, and then they had a win right at the beginning of pre-season back in July against Villarreal. But since then, it's been defeat after defeat after defeat, and going into the season with a team that's lacking and having an opening day fixture, although it's at home. And the last time Spurs went there, we did get absolutely smashed in the Premier League. So, I wouldn't say it's like a given, who knows with Spurs, but it's a difficult fixture to start the season. And Spurs are definitely going to be looking at that, having had a decent pre-season and made some good signings with an eye on a big win to start the season. So Leicester, I've got Harry Winks at the moment. I think he's going to be the 4.5 midfielder of choice, just simply because we know that he's going to start week in, week out. I think he got 3 goals last year. Let's be honest, if you're signing Harry Winks, you're not signing him for any attacking threat. You're literally signing him because, you know, he's a 4.5 and he's going to start every week. That's as far as I'd invest in Leicester right now.
Yeah, we should obviously say as well they've lost their manager Maresca, so it's hard to sort of take stuff from last season too strongly there.
Yeah, for sure.
And Dewsbury Hall as well, who's gone to Chelsea, so that's another big loss. Yeah, I think if there's one fixture this week that could be 3 or 4-0, I think it's Spurs. As much as I hate to say it, I think that could be the big result of the weekend. So moving on to Liverpool. Liverpool have obviously caused a bit of a stir the last week with Jota coming to the fore. They had 2 pre-season friendlies on the weekend back to back, but it looked like it was very much a first team and a second team. With Jota, Diaz, Salah, Trent, Van Dijk, Alisson all getting the nod in the first game. Interestingly, Simicast started as well. He could potentially be a 1 week punt, but you're probably not going to go there. But yeah, it looks like people are moving away from Salah despite Liverpool actually having a really good pre-season.
Yeah, I think so. I think, Simicast, Robertson played in the other game, and I think we were all expecting him to be out for a little bit longer, maybe than he has been, but he played in that second string team game that they played against Las Palmas after they'd played against the starting 11, for want of a better way of putting it, played against Sevilla. I think Simicast, if he starts in game week 1, it will only be for the game against Ipswich, and then I expect to see Robertson back. There's also a potential that he doesn't get the nod because we don't always see Simicast get the nod when Robertson is out. So for me, he'd be too risky. I think I wanted to have Salah. I was mad hot on Salah. He's had the summer off. He'd had all of the pre-season under the new manager. I like the attacking football that Slot's team are playing right now. I like the way they're set up. But the budget factors are massively problematic. And so for me, I've swapped my investment down to Diogo Jota at the moment. He's had a good time in pre-season since he came back. And of course, he's not been there for the whole of it because he was away with Portugal at the Euros. But he has got a goal and 3 assists, and it was a nice goal that he scored in the game against Sevilla at the weekend. I think for me, Liverpool, there's plenty of potential options there. You can go for a Trent, but I'm not sure that clean sheets are really there. There's a bit of a rotation risk around Kwanzaa. If you want to go for him, fine, but there's always the Kanate shaped issue just kind of lingering in the background. And then with Jota, I know I'm taking a bit of a risk. I'm expecting to play in the number 9 against Ipswich in game week 1, but then after that, is he going to stay there? I think it depends on how well he plays, and obviously we'll see Gakpo and Darwin coming back as well at some stage into the manager's thought process. So it feels a little bit uncertain with Slot's team because he's had so many players not around during the course of pre-season, and I think once we see game week 1 and game week 2, we'll get a feel for exactly who is playing where in that front three, which might make it easier to choose from. But Jota for game week 1 does feel nice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's in my team for definite. It's quite annoying he scored actually because he was in my team before that. But anyway.
Yeah.
So moving on to Man City, the champions. The big news overnight is that Oscar Bob is out. He's fractured his leg, unfortunately for him, so he's not going to be playing. He was there. He's contributed 6 goals in pre-season with 4 assists and scoring 2 himself. I guess it's so uncertain at Man City because Foden hasn't played any minutes, Rodri hasn't played any minutes, Stones hasn't, Walker hasn't, De Bruyne got 20 in the Community Shield, I think. So Haaland aside, we don't really need to talk about him, but he's fit, he's firing 5 goals, he's good. But apart from that, I mean, it's anyone's guess really who's going to start. Grealish is injured, so I mean, if you're a bit crazy, Savinho maybe you go there, but it's so much is up in the air.
It does feel like a difficult one to call with them. I mean, I think you go Haaland absolutely, but then after that, it's how do you double up if you want to. Vardiol, there's a lot of thought that he hasn't been as attacking in this team in the way that they've been playing, but then again, maybe that's because of the way that the team has been set up in the personnel that Pep has had available. And it might therefore be that once we get proper City back, that we see Vardiol on these kind of runs forward that we're used to seeing from him last season. I think in terms of the midfielders, it is a bit difficult because if we knew that Foden was going to start, I think a lot of people would go there. I think KDB's a risk because we've not seen him starting regularly in pre-season either. You mentioned Grealish, I think would have been a great pick, but now we've got an injury to him, so he's a no-go. Whether Eze's going to sign or not, whether they're going to sign somebody different, it all kind of remains to be seen. So for me, obviously it's Haaland, but I think I'd steer clear of the midfielders now. Bob was the obvious choice for these early weeks. Now he's injured. I don't think there is an obvious choice until we know that Foden is back and available.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Bernardo Silva came on and scored in the Community Shield.
He did.
He may well just slot in on the right with Doku on the left. But yeah, it would be a brave manager to go for a City midfielder, I think, for game week 1.
Yeah.
Moving on to Man United, who impressed me a little bit in the Community Shield. To be fair, Garnacho looked alright. Ahmad looked decent. He scored a couple of goals in pre-season, but he also came off early, so I think that kind of tells you all you need to know. It's still Bruno, the main man there, I think.
Yeah, but I think the worry I have is the cost implications of having Bruno and how you afford to do that without compromises elsewhere. I think Garnacho will be the popular pick if you want to go for Manchester United because it saves that level of budget coming in at the 6.5 million. I mean, there are some lovely 6.5 million players, and we've talked about some of them already with the likes of Nkunku. But Garnacho does feel like he could be up there and competing. Obviously, gets the goal in the Community Shield. And I think ahead of that, we weren't necessarily sure about his availability to start the early part of the season because he'd gone long in the international tournaments. However, comes on and immediately scores, and I think made a big difference when he did come on as well. So Manchester United have been unlucky. They've brought in a new defender who's then gone and got injured, and they've got a lot of defensive problems. So I don't think you're going for a United defender, but a Garnacho at 6.5 does feel like a really an inexpensive way to invest in a Manchester United team if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, defensively they've still got issues. I mean, they were lining up with Johnny Evans, obviously top professional, but he's still starting for Man United in 2024. So yeah, they have signed De Ligt though yesterday, so there's a bit of uncertainty around the defence, which maybe we can exploit with Fulham attackers on Friday. Cool. So moving on to Newcastle, they have the form man is Jacob Murphy, 5 goals and 3 assists. Looks like he's going to start on the right for now, so he could potentially be a bit of a good differential. Gordon is back. He's played 45 minutes only, so you would think he starts, but potentially an early sub for Barnes, who's had more of a pre-season. Isak's been smashing it. He's fully fit, 3 goals, 1 assist. And Lewis Hall looks like he is the left back, with Dan Burn needed at centre back for now.
Seems like it, doesn't it? But again, feels a little bit uneasy given their very much in the hunt for Mark Gahey. I think 3 bids now turned down. If he ends up going there, you'd expect obviously he'll go straight in at centre back. What does that mean for Dan Burn? Does that mean Dan Burn goes out on the left? What does that then mean for Lewis Hall? Does Dan Burn go on there? But I think there feels like there could be some uncertainty, and these are the kind of transfers that we hate when they get so close to game week 1, because you're having to make a call that, you know, Lewis Hall in game week 1 looks fantastic against Southampton, but then what happens if on Monday next week Gahey signs? What does that mean for the way they set up for game week 2? I don't want to be causing myself further transfer issues immediately after the first deadline, but it's very hard to know what's going to happen in this one. The fact that Newcastle have been back in 3 times suggests that they are quite serious and they do want to make that transfer happen. And of course, Palace know how valuable Gahey is and are holding out for more money on that transfer. Lewis Hall, I think, is a nice pick for game week 1, though, for sure. It's just how long and what happens if Gahey signs, and therefore what happens to the changes that might come as a result of that. Isak, I think, is the obvious pick, the most heavily owned player in the game. I think he'll be highly captained, and I do actually really like the Jacob Murphy pick. I think, you know, he's a really, really nice differential. Not many people own him. Nice cheap way into the Newcastle attack if you don't want to spend the level of budget that you have to on Gordon. But again, how long do we see? If the performances continue, then he's going to stay in the team week in, week out. But if the performances start to tail off, they have got plenty of other options instead that they can play there.
Yeah, and just briefly, Gordon, 45 minutes. Would you go there if I told you he's going to play 60, 65?
Not for me. I don't think so. I've got... Partly that's because the way I like to structure my team, I don't like to invest in double of anybody in attack in the early part of the season, because I like to watch for form, and Isak, I think, is the form player at Newcastle. And I think you could have plenty of other options that are going to play the full 90 at other clubs. Maybe it's not as nice a fixture, but could still do just as well as Gordon.
Yeah, cool. Forest, they are attracting a bit of interest with their first 3 fixtures. Bournemouth at home, Southampton at home in their first 3, which is obviously really good. Chris Wood's been in good form, 3 goals and 2 assists in pre-season. Hudson-Odoi as well, although he didn't start the last friendly because they lined up essentially in a system without wingers, which has cooled a lot of people off him, I think. Goalkeeper-wise, I think everyone wants to go there. Sells has played the most minutes and looks like he's going to start the season. Miguel wasn't even on the bench for the last friendly. However, they keep getting linked to another keeper, including Ramsdale, so I'm not sure you can go there just yet.
It's really tough with the goalkeeper, isn't it? Because I think if you had your free reign to pick and you knew that they were all going to start, you would go for Sells in the 4.5 bracket, because the fixtures are nice and look good for clean sheets. But with Miguel there and with this link to Aaron Ramsdale as well as to other goalkeepers, I think it would be risky to go for him in the early part of the season, unless you're going for another 4.5 goalkeeper as well to cover out the potential benching that might come there. Chris Wood, I laughed at a lot of people, including our Chris, in the early part of the season for picking Chris Wood when the game went live. But actually, you know, the last game of pre-season, he got 2 assists and a goal in that one. So has ended pre-season in just as good form as he started it. I think the issue for me is that is there a better way to use that forward line than to have Chris Wood as part of it? And in terms of how many goals are Nottingham Forest going to score this time around? But if you want to go there because you can't afford to have, say, a Solanke or a Mateta or somebody that's, you know, in that 7.5 or greater bracket, then he does look like a decent pick at 6. And it's just a shame with the goalkeeper. What would be really nice is if the manager came out and said, I'm going to play Sells for the next 3 weeks, and then we'd all go, great, okay, let's invest there. But unless that happens, I think you either can't go there or you have to get 2 4.5 keepers.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Turner is one of the most highly owned keepers. He's not going to play, so I would take him out your team to avoid a price drop there.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So Southampton, interestingly with Southampton, they have signed Brereton Diaz, who we saw last year from Sheffield United, and he is actually, according to the Fantasy Football Scout predicted points, the best 5.5 million midfielder for the first few weeks. Because apart from Newcastle away, they do have some really good fixtures. We obviously got Armstrong as well, 5.5 forward, who scored 24 goals in the Championship last year. And then we've got some 4 million defenders, including Harwood Bellis, who seems nailed on to start.
Yeah, and did score in pre-season as well. Has got a goal there. So some options. Southampton historically, when they were in the league, didn't keep that many clean sheets. So I think if you're going for a Southampton defender, it has to be one with some level of attacking threat. And we've seen a little bit of that from Harbour Bellis. We know they've signed Charlie Taylor from Burnley on a free. We know that he's got some attacking threat as well, and often is a good budget option for our FPL teams. But yeah, it does feel like if you want to invest in Southampton, then you're probably looking at Armstrong up top or Brennington Diaz in the mid.
Yeah. Onto your beloved Spurs, Sam. Reluctantly, I'm pretty high on them. I've got Solanke, I've got Porro as well. The big one is obviously Solanke. The preseason numbers, I think we should kind of take with a pinch of salt because they're without Solanke, and we've already heard that Kulusevski is not going to be playing up front, despite him getting 3 goals and 3 assists in preseason, doing just that. So Son's been alright, 3 goals, Porro 2 goals, showing that he is one of the most attacking defenders in the league. And I've heard quite a lot of love for Bergvall, the 4.5 million midfielder. There's a lot of pressure on James Maddison, I think, from him.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that there's that much pressure on James Maddison, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, Spurs have had a decent pre-season. We played 6 games, we won 4 of them. We only lost the last two, which were against Bayern, and you know, it wasn't like we played badly in those games. We still had some attacking returns. Obviously, Porro got the goal against Bayern when we were playing them in South Korea, and then Kulusevski with two when we played them at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium last weekend. I think it will be all changed though. We were playing in a system where it was Kulusevski up top with Johnson and Son out wide and then Maddison through the middle. That system worked really nicely throughout pre-season. But of course, now we've signed Solanke, would expect him to go in up top. I think that opens up a world of opportunities for Postecoglou in terms of rotation around the rest of those positions. I would expect that Brennan Johnson and Kulusevski would share minutes out on the right. Son's obviously going to get all the game time on the left. So if you do want to ever present, then I think Solanke and Son are the ways to go. Maddison's position has threat from a number of different areas. Kulusevski's been fantastic and he's played in the number 10 lots of times before and played really nicely there, so could drop in there as well. And as you've mentioned, you've got Bergvall as well, who can also play in that position. But I think that Maddison, it's his spot to lose, really. And as vice captain and on set pieces, I would expect him to be the one that gets the most regular starts, with Bergvall maybe coming on sort of 60, 70 minutes to replace him. I think if you want to invest in Spurs, Solanke is the obvious pick. I think it's going to be tough to get to Son this season because of the 10 million. There are other players you'd want there. And then, of course, there's Porro at the back, who's going to be popular because we've seen him score a couple of goals in pre-season. Porro generally is better when it's Brennan Johnson that's on that side, because Johnson will stay wider and allow Porro to come in, whereas Kulusevski tends to come in himself, which then means they often end up a bit too tight to each other. So if it's Johnson that gets to start out there, then I think that works better for Porro. If you don't want to spend that level of budget on Porro, because I'm not 100% sure there's many clean sheets for Spurs in these early weeks of the season. You have got Van der Ven, who's in at 4.5. You've also got Romero, who's at 5. And Udogi seems to have recovered enough from his thigh injury. He came on in this last pre-season friendly, so I would expect him to get the nod over Spence in game week 1 too.
Yeah. For FPL managers looking to get an edge, I wonder if Bergvall in half an hour is better than Winks 90 minutes. I don't know. Could be one for the Maverick managers there. But yeah, you've signed Timo Werner as well as back as a backup option on the left. You would think. Two more teams to go. So West Ham. Not a lot of love for them in pre-season. I don't think I've seen West Ham players in any teams really, apart from maybe Areola. They've signed Wan-Bissaka as their new right back, and obviously Jared Bowen we know is class, and he's scored and got an assist in the last pre-season. Just to emphasise that.
I'm quite keen on having Jared Bowen in my team, actually, and I think that might be where I go if I lose Eze. He's been named the captain as well today, so you get that security and the sort of talismanic impact of being the leader of the team. I think that makes a difference. I actually quite like West Ham. I like Lopetegui as a manager. I think that he should, and we've not yet seen it in pre-season, but he should make them more solid defensively, and they've made some decent signings at the back as well. Obviously, he's brought Max Kilman in, who he's worked with before. So the fact that they've strengthened at the back, and you've already mentioned Wan-Bissaka, that should make them defensively more secure in front of Areola. And with the way that Lopetegui plays, I would expect there to be some clean sheets there for West Ham. They've got Fulcrum up top now as well, which should add a bit of presence in a number 9 slot, because they have been lacking that a little bit. And you've got the options of Bowen at 7.5 or Kudus at 6.5. Whichever one of them starts the season well, I think you can wait with West Ham a couple of weeks, but they are definitely the team I'm watching to look to how I invest in for sure.
Yeah, cool. And then we should just say that Paqueta, despite all the speculation, he is obviously good to go. There's been no repercussions for his alleged offences yet, anyway. And he got a goal in the last friendly as well. Uh, so finally, with Wolves, they have got potentially a 4 million defender in Mosquera, who looks like he may well replace Kilman in that back line. So that's one to watch there. Otherwise, their new forward, Strand Larson, hasn't scored yet, but he's got 3 assists. And Cunha is, well, we don't know if he's fit. He got an injury in pre season, so that's probably an avoid. And they've obviously lost Neto as well, so I'm not too high on Wolves yet, I don't think.
No, and I think they are a team that you can afford to just wait and see with. I don't think you need to invest straight away. I think that the players that they've lost are big ones. That losing Max Kilman, who was so important to them defensively, and like you say, they've also lost Neto, who, all right, he was injured for big chunks of seasons whilst with Wolves, but still quite an important figurehead in terms of the way that they play. Cunha was great in parts last season, but a little bit unsure about his fitness going into game week 1, because he did pick up that injury. The suggestion afterwards was that he should be fine for the start of the season, but we haven't heard any confirmation on that yet. But actually, their preseason has been quite mixed. I mean, they beat West Ham 3-1, they lost to Crystal Palace 3-1, they've had a 3-0 victory against Leipzig. So there's been plenty of goals for Wolves. They beat Bristol 3-0 as well. So they've scored plenty of goals. I think there could be an option. Is just trying to work out who from Wolves that feels more difficult than usual. I think they're one of the teams where, because they haven't really got a standout signing anymore that you can have in FPL, you're going to have to just wait and see who's the one that really starts the season with a bit of a bang, and then maybe look to move to them once we get going.
Yeah, so that's great. That concludes our whistle stop tour of all 20 teams, their pre-season, their new signings, and any big injuries that you need to know about. All this content was from the Fantasy Football Scout pre-season guide, which I'll drop a link in the description for. Lots of it is free. However, there is some really, really good paid content as well, including the minutes tracker, in-depth articles, and we've also got expert team reveals from all our pro pundits as well, and the members area, and of course our new app, which Sam worked incredibly hard on, which is great. So do check out the Fantasy Football Scout Premium membership, which is 40% off if you follow the link in the description. Sam, thank you. I know you've got lots on. 2 days to go. Well, 1.5 days to go now. So good luck locking in your final team.
You too. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Cheers, guys.